Good evening, everyone. It's a pride and special privilege to have you all week after week joining us in Guru Manthan. As you might be knowing, it's a weekly series of 50 discussions with educationists and thinkers, and this is being hosted or being organized by the Vivekananda Institute for Leadership Development. WeLead, as we call it, WeLead's mission is to develop human and social capital for building a resurgent India. We engage with partners from across 4 sectors. It includes the government, NGOs, corporates, and communities. And this particular platform, that is Guru Manthan, this year is planned to be a series of lectures where people and especially teachers get to discuss, share and debate and learn from very diverse perspectives and practices in the education sector from across the world. Today is the 8th lecture in the series. In the first month, starting from August 1st, we have had Dr. Gurraj Karjigi, Professor M.K. Sridhar, Mr. Anurag Beher, Mr. T.S. Krishnamurthy and Akansha Bapna. And in this month, we have had Dr. Kasturi Rangan addressing all our teachers, and we have had actually on that day 2,200 teachers joining from across the country to listen to him. And today we have with us Mr. Anil Swarup, and next week we will be joined by Ms. Suma Mahadevan. So it's my privilege to introduce our speaker for the day, Mr. Anil Swarup. Actually, kind of, needs no introduction. I was talking to someone last week, and the moment I mentioned the name, that very senior person kind of recollected, oh, he's the person who cleaned up the coal mess. So Mr. Anil, most people would recollect his work for the phenomenal work he has done across several sectors. Just to give a brief introduction about him, he's an 1981 batch IAS officer who was awarded the Director's Gold Medal for his batch, being the best officer of his batch. And before his 38 years of service as an IAS officer, he did serve as an IPS officer also for a year. And he has 2 very interesting books. Personally, I enjoyed reading them a lot. One of them is the topic about which he'll be talking about today, the ethical dilemmas of a civil servant. And the other one is not just a civil servant. And I do recommend to our audience that they do read these books. And like I mentioned, he is most remembered for his work in the coal sector, coal ministry as a secretary, then as the secretary of the MHRD, and for his long tenure as a IAS officer in the UP cadre. So good evening, sir, and I should thank you for joining us on this Saturday evening. So like every week, we would be having a 25 to 30 minute lecture by sir. And then we would have an opportunity to interact with him through a Q&A session. And towards the end, sir will be giving his closing remarks for 2-3 minutes, and we would try to wind up roughly around 8 p.m. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me here. I am what I am today because of Swami. My inspiration comes from Swami Vivekananda. So anyone who approaches me taking that name, it's a foregone yes, no matter how busy I am, because I owe it to him for what I am today. And I recall this incident when I was just in class 12. And at that point in time, at that adolescent age, you're not very sure which direction you should move. While waiting for my train at a platform, I bought a book, the first ever that I bought of Swami Vivekananda. I read that book and that changed me. I started having a lot of belief in myself. There were some doubts. And as I traveled through my journey as a civil servant, I kept going back to what Swami said, to find my moorings, ethical moorings. And that held me a lot. And as I keep saying, Yes, indeed, as I joined the service, there were a lot of dilemmas that I faced. Dilemmas did not cease, but they ceased to exist in my mind. I had a lot of clarity as to what I wanted to do. And that became clearer and clearer. And as I understand more and more of Swamiji through the journey that I went, that book was just a beginning. But I think my inspiration continues to come from the man who I owe. So thank you very much for inviting me here in the name of Swami Vivekananda. And I feel blessed to be amidst you all. My journey as a civil servant, it's a long one, so I won't talk about the entire journey today. I'll talk about what relates to education, that part of the journey where came at the end of my career. And you mentioned about my journey in the coal sector. Well, when I was posted as coal secretary, I didn't know much about the coal sector except what was getting published in the media about what's going wrong with the sector. But still, I rang up a friend of mine and asked him, how's this coal sector? So instead of answering my question, he asked me a counter question. He asked me, have you seen Gangs of Wasipur? I don't know how many of you are aware of this movie. It talks about the mafias that run the coal sector. But by God's grace and on account of an absolutely amazing team that I had, we managed to sort out the coal sector from acute shortages to a point where we could think in terms of exporting coal to Bangladesh. And we sorted out everything. The coal block auctions were absolutely smooth. We used technology to the hilt. It worked very well. So much so that after having spent some nights in the office at the beginning of my career as coal secretary, at the end of 2 years, I had only about 45 minutes of work. As I said, I had a tremendous team and I could delegate everything to them. And this is one aspect that I'll discuss with you when we talk of leadership, because the fundamental principle of leadership is trust. If you don't trust your people around you, you will be in trouble, the organization will be in trouble, everyone will be in trouble. And I talk this trust is a very subjective material. It's not dependent on the objective conditions. In fact, fundamental principle of leadership is, to my understanding, that you can't do a nut to anybody else, because you have absolutely no control over this. If you have any control, you have control over yourself. You know, my book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, starts with an Urdu couplet, and I hope you understand. It's not terse Urdu, it's very simple Urdu, but you can understand. It talks about the quintessential dilemma that a civil servant, or for that matter, anybody faces, which is मुख्तसर सी जिंदगी के अजब से अफसाने हैं, यहाँ तीर भी चलाने हैं, परिंदे भी बचाने हैं. So you have to, there are problems around you, but you have to wade your way. That's what dilemma is. The ethical dilemma is basically your choice. But that choice depends on your value system. And your value system is your value system and nobody else's value system. And this value system can vary from individual to individual, from family to family, from house to house, from region to region, from countries to country. In my understanding, I cannot advise anybody as to what should be his ethical value system. I can only say that this was my ethical value system. This is how I evolved. This is what I found. This is what I lost. Now it's for you to take a call what you want to follow. It has to be your ethical value system. I can only tell you what was my. Why? The reason is very simple. Even for me, the value system did not remain the same through my journey. So before I read Swami in class 12, I had different view of the world. Once I read him and read more about him, more of him, my view started changing. Then when I experienced in life, my view changed even more. So value system is not frozen in time or place. It's your personal value system. So when I was in coal sector, I learned a lot, and lo and behold, I was shifted as school education secretary. And I was a bit surprised, because it could easily be argued that I was the most uneducated, illiterate civil servant to have been made education secretary. I had no experience whatsoever in the sector at all. But you know, since I was going to education, I thought I'll be moving from the dark dungeons of coal mines to the bright lights of school education. I thought. But soon I was to realize, and this I lead you to the new education policy, the national education policy. But soon I was to discover that while in the coal sector, all the mining was underground and the mafia was overground, in the education sector, all the mafia was underground, eating into the essentials of Indian society. These were devastating the social system. It was as bad as that. So my journey started that way. And very interestingly, my understanding of education came not from the quintessential advisors or the Rai Saabs, as we call in UP, who kept on coming to me telling me what I should do to education, but in my journey around the country. Another lesson that I learned from Swamiji: go to the spot, move around, to learn, to acquire knowledge. Sitting in one place, you will never acquire knowledge. You have to travel around. He traveled in much more hospitable conditions. I was moving in the comfort of an aeroplane, but I did travel to 24 states in the first 3 months of my existence as school education secretary. I don't think any secretary would have traveled so much. And when I say to 24 states, they were not the state headquarters only. The first two districts that I visited were Bastar and Sukma. I traveled from Pune to Goa by car, dropping down on the way, going to interior areas to understand how school education was. I traveled from Srinagar to Leh, not taking the national highway, going deep beside mountains to understand what school education was. And what I discovered was absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. I saw some outstanding work being done in the hinterland of this country. And there was so much to learn. Unfortunately, some of us sitting in Delhi believe that all wisdom resides in Delhi, which is so unfortunately incorrect. It is very incorrect. There's so much wisdom around the country. We have to go around and collect that wisdom. And I tried to do that. I tried to collect that wisdom. What I did was I picked about 110 models and had a workshop in Delhi, called them over. Over 6 days, I tried to understand. My understanding was very clear. The solutions to the problems of school education in this country will not come from Finland, England, Holland, Scotland, New Zealand, or all the lands of the world, but from motherland. The homegrown solutions are much simpler and easier to replicate and scale as compared to importing something, doing a proof of concept, and then trying to find out whether it works or not. So I found these. And out of these 110, we selected 24 models, took them back to the states, and they started scaling. I must give you one example. There are many such examples. In fact, my book has some of these examples. My book has this journey as Secretary of School Education. If you find time, do read it, because a lot of it gets reflected in the education policy, about which I'll come in a few moments. Let me narrate this incident to you, because this was like Vivekananda's book. This was a seminal time for me. I mean, it changed my thinking. I walk into a government school in a place called Pastepada. It's 120 kilometers north of Thane district, in interior areas, a tribal area. And I was informed that this school, this 2-room school, doesn't have electricity. So I met the teacher there, Sandeep Gund, and walked along with him into the classroom. And I was shocked, pleasantly. I saw that every child had a tablet. So I asked him, where do you get the electricity from? I am told there's no electricity here. So he takes me around the 2 rooms and shows me a foldable solar panel through which he's charging the batteries, and through batteries he's charging these tablets. I was shocked. I told him, but where did you get the money for these tablets? He tells me that when he had come to the school as a teacher, when he was posted here, there were about 40, 50 children. Some of them never came to the school, all shapes, size, and age. He didn't know what to do with them. So he had a second-hand laptop. He used to play some educational videos randomly. These children used to congregate around him, and they started enjoying it. After 2 months, 20 sets of parents come to the school and ask him a funny question. Earlier, these children never wanted to go to the school. Now they rush to the school. What have you done? So he explained what he did. And finding them interested, he made a request to them. Now, these were poor people. He requested them to contribute 500 rupees each. They did contribute 500. And he bought 2 tablets and attached them to his laptop and made them into 3 age-wise groups. This passion of the teacher was traveling around. So one day, an NGO and a CSR funding agency, they visited the school, and they were extremely impressed with the passion of this teacher. So they decided to fund the tablets and a smart screen. Around which time I visited the school, and I was also floored by his passion. So I took a photograph with him and I tweeted it. Suddenly, Sandeep Gund becomes a local hero. His school becomes a pilgrimage. Surrounding school teachers started visiting school and started replicating what he's doing in their own small way. In the meanwhile, I met the President of India, Mr. Kovind. He had just taken over as president. I met him in a different context altogether, but since he had time, I narrated this wonderful story of Sandeep Gun to him. He looked very impressed. So I asked him, would you like to meet him? He said, why not? So I get Sandeep Gund over to Delhi. He meets the president, gets the national award, photograph gets taken. Sandeep Gund becomes a national hero. But that's not the end of the story. The Paste Pada model has subsequently been replicated in more than 50,000 schools of Maharashtra, government schools of Maharashtra, with not a single penny coming from the government. 354 crores raised through crowdfunding. Now, this is what I learned. Was my learning in the, and of course, I can go on. There are many such examples. Actually, this made me think about a movement that I've started now called the Nexus of Good, where we are trying to propagate good work because we want to create a parallel narrative of positivity, again coming from Swami Vivekananda. It comes from you, it emanates from you. If you are positive, you have that positive energy, the positive energy will come together. That's what Nexus of Good is all about. Of course, this was one part of it. The second part was, how do I handle the mafias of the school education? So in my book, I've listed out a few mafias. The biggest mafia of them all is the one that runs B.Ed and D.L.Ed colleges, that trains students to become teachers. I discovered 25% of these colleges do not exist. They are just on paper, and they can give you a degree. If you pay them well, you can even get a Naukri service. That's the racket that was going on. No, it's a long story. I won't narrate it again. It's there in my book. We tried to take action. I didn't succeed then. One of my colleagues had to resign from the IS. It was one of the failures at the end of my career. So this mafia, but good news is that the new education policy takes care of that aspect as it brings in 4-year degree course, integrated year course. So all these fraudulent colleges will have to close shop, hopefully. That's my hope in that. So that's where the policy takes care of that aspect. The second, of course, was the publishing mafia. There was the private school mafia. Not that all private schools. Most of the private schools are doing wonderful job. It's a handful of them. And mafia actually, by definition, is not everybody. It's just only a handful, powerful people who destroy and play with the system and do a lot of damage to the society. So there were many such. Then there's another mafia. That's a recruitment mafia. I don't know whether you're aware that one of the former chief ministers is behind the bars for recruitment of teachers. So imagine a scenario. An untrained teacher gets a degree, finds a way into government schools, and the entire school suffers for next 30 odd years because this teacher doesn't teach. This is not to say teachers are not good. I gave you an example of a government teacher who's doing a phenomenal work. So it takes all types to make this world. I'm glad that the policy attempts to address some of the fundamental issues relating to education, school education. So, for example, you have a wonderful concept of preschool education now, which has been suggested in the policy. It is scientifically established that the brain of the child gets made in the initial few years. So hence preschool was important. So the policy talks about it, and hopefully it will happen. Similarly, policy also talks about teaching in mother tongue. Again, very scientifically established that a child is able to comprehend complicated concepts in his own mother tongue much better than in another language. Now, mind you, the policy does not talk about not learning other language. It is talking about the medium of instruction. And we must understand this difference because many people are getting confused with this. Policy doesn't talk about anything against English. They say, please learn English. But in the first 5 years, and those that are skeptical about it, let me tell you that the best school in Delhi, which is Sardar Patel Vidyalaya, teaches in mother tongue from class 1 to 5. Best of children come out from there. The Jawaharlal Nehru Vidyalaya, JNVs, run by the government, for class 1 to 8, mother tongue, best of students come out. So it's wrong to say that it's only in English that you become bright. I think we have to get over that mentality. Any language that you perfect is as good as any other language. And there's no harm in learning other languages also. But in the beginning, it is essential to understand the mother tongue. It's very, very important. Similarly, the other provisions, the flexibility that the policy provides in terms of selection of subjects. I think the best part of the policy is the focus on the teacher. That I think would not require so much money to be invested. But if teachers related issues, again, on account of positive time, I would rather spend more time interacting with you all. And in response to those questions, I'll go into the details if required. But right now, I don't want to make a very long speech in terms of monologue. So the teachers are there. Then the focus on vocational training, phenomenal. the focus on learning outcomes, on competencies rather than rote learning. All these are very bright aspects. I mean, people talk more about 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3. That is nonsense. I don't think that's much to be said about it. But there are other aspects of the policy which are brilliant. My only problem with the policy is that where is the money going to come from? That is one major problem. Policy talks about 6% of GDP. I think that was said by Dr. Kothari also long ago, but 6% is nowhere coming, and I don't see it coming in the future. And hence, I have suggested to those that have approached me that start doing things where money is not required. Because, the problem in this country is that everyone has an idea, and education policy is a compendium of ideas. But for an idea to fructify and sustain in a democracy like ours, it has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, and judicially tenable. A handful, it can be done, but I see some problem in terms of financial availability, finance availability. The second problem that I see with the policy, which is otherwise brilliant, is the manner in which it treats the private schools. I would have believed that this was a huge opportunity to get the private sector on board. Why should we treat them as, belonging to some other world? It talks about only not-for-profit. I mean, I know for sure as Secretary of Education that number of private schools are making money. They don't call it profit. They know how to use it. Why unnecessarily create this definition? Allow them to make profit. And once they make profit, tax it. Get this money into the education system. You can do that. Why didn't we do that? I don't know. We stuck somewhere. Barring these two, of course, the policy should have also talked about engaging with the non-governmental organization. Because in these visits to 24 states, I found amazing examples of public-private partnership. We are stuck in this world thinking about negatives of each other. The private person thinks everyone in the government is corrupt. Everyone in the government thinks that every private man is making money this way or the other. Both are equally wrong. I think there are good people on both sides of the fence. These good people need to come together. That's what Nexus Good is all about. These days I'm doing the easiest thing, talking. Walking is the more difficult part, but I can go on talking for a few more hours on education policy or anything. But I would like to conclude right here, and I'll continue. I'll conclude with where I started. I started by saying that it totally depended on you, how you want to evolve as a leader, whether you are a teacher or a principal, wherever you are. It's totally dependent on you because you have, as I said, no control over the others. And hence, my book, Ethical Dilemma of Civil Servant, concludes with a couplet which is totally focused on the individual, which says, खुद ही को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे बता तेरी रजा क्या है. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was a great 20-minute starter. Moving to the questions, we had a few questions which we picked up based on your book. I would like to start with one or two questions based on that, and meanwhile we will pick questions from the audience as well. One of the areas which did come up when I was interacting with several private schools and in my own visits to government schools was with respect to the Right to Education Act. Now, you did write about it in your book. There is always this question about for whom is this Right to Education Act? And I have been a witness to cases where children whose parents aspire to send them to good schools admit them into the private schools under the 25% quota. But because of the limited support systems, they continue to struggle. And there is always this, question in the teacher's mind, in the school manager's mind, management's mind. Are we doing justice for those kids? Are we doing enough for those kids? And had they been in a public school or a government school with their peers around, maybe they could have done better. Your thoughts on that, sir?
So first of all, my thoughts on Right to Education Act. I think it was not required. Why do you require something which you can do in any case? No one prevented government from doing what is written in the Right to Education Act. Why that act? Unfortunately, when British left this country, they took justice with them. Left behind laws and outlaws. So we have come to this view that until we have a law, we won't do anything. Why not? Why did we have the act? The problem with the act is, and there's a full chapter in my book, Ethical Dilemmas, that it has done more damage to school education than good to school education. Now, this point that you are mentioning about Section 12 of the Act, it could have been done without the legislation. The government could have easily made it as a registration condition with the school, because every school has to be registered. If the school has to be registered, it could be a registration condition that you will then, as you rolled out that facility, if some changes were to be brought, it would have been easy to do. Now today, everyone knows that there is a problem with this section in its operation, but to change it, I have to go back to the parliament. You don't know how difficult it is for me to go to parliament and get the act changed. So I don't know why did we do it. And in a fast dynamic society, if you bring legislation or everything, the amendment, you have to go back to the parliament. You have to leave a lot to the people on the ground to evolve as per the changed set of circumstances, because you can't visualize everything and make it into a law. If at all there was to be a law, you can have a broad framework and then allow it to operate. Again, the tragedy is that we want to do everything centrally, because I started with the word no trust. We distrust everyone, and hence we want to have all the powers in our hand, and that power comes through the legislation. Why do you do that? I'm really surprised why that act came in, and I have, even as secretary, I used to condemn that act. I used to say it was not required. First, it was not required. Then, of course, I can go on and say what is wrong with the act. Some of it gets articulated in the book. So I don't think acts are solution or legislations are solutions to the problems. I am not against legislations, but legislation should not bound my hands. They do. This legislation does. And then, for example, we had about 14 lakh teachers who were untrained. Now, under the act, I should have thrown them out. Is it practically possible to throw them out? It's not. Now I had to get the act amended to enable them to do that. Oh, what's this nonsense? So much time gets wasted. So I don't know. It takes all types to make this world.
Yes. One more question before I hand over to Ramesh. Sir, you did write about this briefly in your book as well. There is so much focus now from the bureaucracy. There is a lot of push both from the bureaucracy as well as from the political bosses on achieving high pass percentages. Now, in the state of Karnataka, every year the department themselves publish a district-wise ranking, and every district in charge minister wants their district to be at the top. And I was witness to a very interesting teacher training program where a science teacher seemed to have dissected the entire question paper. He said, if you know how to draw the diagrams, you get 18 marks. If you know how to write one-line definitions, you get 8 more marks. If you know how to write the question paper twice, you will get other 4 grace marks, and you will know how to pass. And if we are reducing education or learning to achieving those 30 marks of how to pass an exam, don't you think we are doing disservice, or aren't we defeating the very purpose of the system?
I totally agree with you. But for finding solution to any problem, you must understand the why of a problem. Why does a problem exist? Once you do that, you can find a solution. I did that. This problem of getting more and more marks existed because everyone is happy. The child is happy, the teacher is happy, the principal is happy, the school is happy, the parents are happy, the politician is happy, everyone is happy. So I call it a farcical delusion in my book. Everyone was happy with the farcical delusion. Now, I was not happy, obviously. So when I became school education secretary, there's a full chapter. I took upon myself, call all the state board heads to Delhi, had a discussion with them through the day. And I convinced them we should not do this, because ultimately the child gets to know the ground reality and he feels very bad thereafter. So everyone agreed. So we came out with a circular where everyone agreed that they will not spike the marks, as it's called, no spiking. Now everyone agreed, but the courts did not. Went to the court, they got a stay order. They knew Mr. Anil Swarup will retire in next 3 months. We can be happy thereafter. I see that this year also, 2 years after that, they are still happy. Because how do you believe that a child gets 100 out of 100 in English literature? Shakespeare must be turning in his grave. What's going on? How can you get 100 out of 100? But you get it because they spike the marks. Now, the good news is this happens because of the admission to universities. That's why this mark. That's one of the major reasons. Now, the good news is that policy takes care of it. Policy talks about a separate entrance exam to universities. The premium on getting more and more marks will come down somewhat, if not totally.
Sir, if I were to bring this question down into what would happen inside a school now, as individuals, what would be your message to a teacher? What would be your message to a principal who is a part of this process?
My message to teachers is that you may feel temporarily satisfied and kicked about the marks that the child gets, but you will be dissatisfied if child ends up in a failure subsequently. You are preparing for the child for a future life. And the example that I give is as follows. No one asked me what was my percentage of marks in class 12 today. You talk about coal, the cleaning up that I did. It is irrespective of the marks that I got in class 12. So ultimately it is not even mentioned anywhere. So what are we trying for? These temporary rewards that we get are not remembered. You must focus on creating it. Again, going to Swami Vivekananda, you make an individual a manner that these results become redundant. He glows as an individual. His individuality glows, not his marks. Marks may be a reflection of some of his personality, but his personality is not made out of marks.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Over to Ramesh.
Yeah. Uh, Thank you, Praveen. I think one of the lines I absolutely loved, I don't know if it was in one of your books or is one of the talks that you gave, is that you said by being honest, you're doing no one a favor. But while it's a line that's absolutely true, it is also at the heart of most ethical dilemmas, because most of us are within systems that disincentivize people to be honest or something. Just wanted to know, for the benefit of others, how does one maintain that? How do you remain grounded when the whole everything else is so very different?
No, if you recall my initial statements, I said you have absolutely no control over others. Fortunately, we are in a country where we should believe karmanyevadikaraste ma phaleshu kadarshi. But we don't believe in it. We say it, we don't believe it. Once you start believing in it, then you come to this conclusion that you are responsible for your own acts. And then you take a call. In my book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, I try to answer this question. I answer this question in the manner that there are costs to be paid for both being honest and dishonest. Those who say that being dishonest, the cost is not to be paid, is absolutely wrong. I give examples from my own state where two chief secretaries were set behind the bars. So they were dishonest, they paid a price. Now, if we look at only the positives of dishonesty and the negatives of honesty, there's a problem. If you look at it objectively on either side, there are problems. No path is full of bed of roses. It's not. In both paths, there are difficulty. Now that's your personal choice. I made a personal choice of following a particular path, and I feel contented. You may not feel contented. As I said, your value system is your own. What gives you a kick is only you can define what gives you. I can't define it for you. But if you say that, look at around, dishonest people are thriving, that's absolute nonsense. You're only looking at thriving dishonest people. You're not looking at thriving honest people. I have given examples of 50 civil servants in my book who are honest and efficient and thrived. But if I don't choose to look at them and I look at honest, dishonest, thriving people, then it's my call. So when you pay a price for being dishonest, then don't blame somebody else. Because the world allows you both to be honest and dishonest. It's wrong to say that only dishonest can survive in this world. No. I know of so many honest people. Where did I get inspiration from? I got inspiration from those people who were honest and survived and thrived. Yes, life was not easy. Life was not easy for me also. So you think every dishonest person has an easy life? Again, the choice is yours. That is number one. The other point that you were making was that as a civil servant, I cannot be honest full stop. Honesty is a necessary condition, but not sufficient condition for an efficient officer. I am paid not merely to be honest. Honest is a priori requirement. I am paid for delivering on the ground. So I can't use honesty as an excuse for not doing anything. That's the point I'm trying to drive home. There's a full chapter in my book on honesty alone is not enough, right in the beginning of the book.
I think that was a wonderful answer. This is more or less a connected question, but slightly different in the sense that you often credit you credit the teams that you worked with. You say that most of the credit actually goes to the team. But the question is that quite often when you've moved into a department or into a sector, it's been the same. Probably you worked with a group of people who already existed there, who already were in that department or in that sector. Uh, so what is it that a leader brings that energizes a group of people who are working in a particular fashion earlier, but have now been able to come together and collaborate in a way that they brought about positive change. So what is that change that has been
The
possible? Because
formula is
obviously,
very simple. It's not as difficult as it is made out. Very simple. All complexity exists in your mind. They are what they are. You are given objective conditions. You have to make the best out of it. Now, how do you do that? Start number one with trust. I mean, I'm shocked to see. I was a secretary for 4 years. Barring the initial 3 months as co-secretary, I used to leave my office at 6 o'clock. And people used to wonder, you are the only secretary going away. The secretary sitting till 8 o'clock. So my answer was very simple. I found people who are better than me. Why shouldn't they be allowed to do work and I should do that? Now, first is trust. Because the moment you start trusting people, their commitment to you starts increasing. It's a bilateral sort of thing. Number two, once you trust, you'll start delegating. The moment you start delegating, you are conveying a trust to him. And then delegation happens. Then the support. Once you delegate and he knows that if there is some bona fide mistake and here is a man who stands by you, will support you, they will lay the life for you. So it's basically trust, delegation, support by creating such environment conditions wherein the person who has to perform feels secure. And a secure person will give a better performance as compared to you. And finally, it comes out of all these 3 years, your decision should be after discussion with the stakeholders. So there is an acceptance of the decision here. And finally, a pat on the back. So if you read my book, it's all about these 5 things. It's not rocket technology. People have argued we should have experts. Why don't we have experts? I see it, expertise can be outsourced, but attitude can't be outsourced. Attitude you have to develop yourself. So as coal secretary, I didn't know anything about the coal sector. Yet we managed to do everything because I found the right people for the right job. That's my job. And then gave them that environment where they could feel secure and deliver. And of course, give them all the credit. Failures were mine, successes were there. And rightly so, because see, I reveled in talking. So someone had to do the walking. So they did the walking and I did the talking. I walked away with all the credit, but credit goes to them.
thank you, sir. That was very, very well said. Yeah. Praveen, yeah.
Yeah, so there was a question from a different platform, but one of our audience raised that question. You mentioned earlier in your address today saying that among the education secretaries, you would possibly be the least qualified academically. Now, for some time, there has been a discussion that we should have an Indian education service to bring in more governance into or better governance into the education sector. Now, having said that, I am not sure if that would by itself change the way the education sector is run. But I would like to, know your views about the same.
I'm indifferent to it. If they want to bring it, bring it. To me, critical part of school education today is the teacher. It has not much to do with administration per se. So if you address issues, I can give a talk of another hour on how to do it. But if you address issues relating to teachers, I think most of our problems of education will be sorted out. That's very critical. What do we do to teacher? And I'm really concerned about it. As far as Indian education service is concerned, we can have it. I've not given it much of a thought. So as I said, I'm indifferent to it.
And one question, sir, you did mention about the key, piece of the puzzle being the teachers. Now, while the policy does propose a 4-year training program and all of that, it will take some time for these teachers to actually be available in huge numbers. So we already have a good number of teachers in our schools. We do have a healthy pupil teacher ratio. We don't have the best of distributions, but we do have a healthy pupil teacher ratio. So what do you think are the key steps? Like if I run a school myself, if I run a small school, what do you think I should be doing with respect to building the capacities of my teachers in a small school that I run?
There are, if let us look at the entire teacher continuum and let us see what can be done in the short run, what can be done in the long run. What you rightly say, that will be slightly in the medium and long term. But let us look at the continuum. The continuum starts with preschool training, okay, before they join the service. Now, even before this 4 years kicks in, again, there is a full chapter I have written on what needs to be done to B.Ed and D.Ed colleges. That can be done straight away. Then the selection process can be changed immediately. You select the right teacher and half your problem. Then the third is when they get into the service, do they have an induction course which can be done immediately? Then those are already there. Can we have a more scientific way of training them regularly? That can be done through Diksha platform, which was set up when I was school education secretary. And now it's maturing into a very, very profound and very good platform where you can enable the teacher to do that. So there are a number of steps that you can take straight away and the impact will be visible. Now, I'm not saying just like that. I saw that. I saw that in Rajasthan. I saw that in Karnataka, where officers took the initiative, and Rajasthan, right from the bottom of learning outcomes, went down to the top. Similarly, Chhattisgarh did very well. So there are many steps that you can take straight away for immediate impact, and some, of course, will take some time.
Sir, any thoughts on how we can balance, scale and quality? Usually there's a notion that as we scale, using the cascading models, we tend to lose out on quality.
Create value around efficiency. We have not done that. See, why did I give you the example of Sandeep Gund? I was creating a value around a particular concept. You imagine what happens. I was traveling to Gujarat in an interior area. A teacher comes running to me and he says, "Sir, why don't you come to my school?" I said, "Why?" "Sir, I have done better than Sandeep Gund." Now, there is a remote location in Gujarat. The teacher is trying to compete with Sandeep Gund. That's what you require to do. You create a value around good work. The moment you do that, people will start, you have to create structures. I'm not against that. What I'm trying to say is, today, once you start appreciating, the entire movement of Nexus of Good is to create a value around good work, convince people that good can be done and expand because good is being done. And that can be done by appreciating good work. We don't do that sufficiently.
One more question, sir. For it could be a separate topic for discussion itself, but because you have mentioned it, teacher education today in the new policy has been proposed to be under the higher education wing. For all these days, it's been under the school education part. Do you think it would matter that much, whether it is under the university fold or under the school education?
I don't think it matters much. So be it. I wouldn't want to waste my time on that. Whether it's higher education, so the quality is good, fair enough. I can't take say that it will be good only if it is a part of school education.
One of the so one of the points that you brought up was about the education in the medium of instruction being the at least up to the 5th standard being in the regional language or the mother tongue or something, which is also part of the policy. But there is also we had a talk also on that, and one of the things that kept coming up also is that there is a level of aspiration that seems to be attached to the English language more than any other language. It's like people who are not comfortable conversing in that language seem to want their children or their this one to only go to English medium schools. So that there is a demand problem also there which needs to be addressed. And how do you think that can be? How can we make education in regional languages also as aspirational as this for the common masses, or how do you make it into a system that works?
See, it is changing. It will change gradually. It won't change overnight. Once it starts getting demonstrated that the children studying in their mother tongue do as well or even better than those studying in a foreign language, then people will gradually, but it won't happen overnight, because these aspirations, as you said, are, a legacy of the British Raj that we had, where we thought that wearing a suit in dead heat would make you look smarter than, wearing your local clothes. It's like wearing your local clothes. I recall that I was attending a conference in Hyderabad where the outside temperature was 42 degrees, and the conference was on conserving energy. And almost everyone in the hall was wearing a suit, and I was wearing a bush shirt like this, and it was freezing cold inside. But because when British left, I said they left behind not only laws, in-laws, and outlaws, they left behind three-piece suit in dead heat. Imagine our judges wearing those. Why should they be wearing that? There's no reason for them to wear that, but they keep wearing it because these are the legacies of the British Raj. We continue with them. It will change over a period of time. I think we'll get rid of ourselves. I'm not saying that you should be wearing something you are uncomfortable with. There should be anything could be decent, but why wear a three-piece suit, in a tie, in dead heat? That's the culture that we've inherited. We'll get out of it gradually.
So one question which the schools tend to struggle with is with the extent of involvement of parents. Now, in public schools, we do have schools where the SDMCs are functional, are doing a very good job. In private schools, there are schools which involve parent volunteering or which encourage a lot of parent volunteering. And there are also private schools which tend to keep the parents at a distance. Can you quote one or two examples from your experience?
I'm very clear in my mind, not only in school, wherever you are functioning, you have to take stakeholders into confidence. And parents are a stakeholder. You can't keep them at a distance. There could be some upstart parents, but just because there are some of them who are upstarts, you can't ignore them. You have to engage with them. Ultimate decision is that of the school, but it benefits them to engage with the children. I interacted with a lot of private schools, and schools that are open in interaction with parents do face some problems, but not as much as those that keep parents at a distance. So I'm firmly of the view that not only in schools, everywhere stakeholders have to be interacted with.
One question from the chat box about now with the criteria being set for that teachers have to be, have to have this kind of an education. Should we also be looking at lateral entry of professionals from other streams also, probably getting into the teaching stream, giving them a lateral entry, like it's being talked about in the civil services. Your thoughts on that?
No, I'm not against lateral entry, but two things have to be ensured. One, the process of lateral entry has to be transparent and objective in nature. That is one. Number two, we should be clear in our mind as to why are we taking lateral entry, whether that the purpose is served or not. Just not because it's a fashion that we must have lateral. You're unhappy with those that are there, so you have lateral entry. The objective should be clear. Why are we doing? I can talk about civil service. I've been asking why this lateral entry. Oh, expertise. I said, why can't you outsource it? Why do you get him? I mean, as I keep saying, as school secretary, I had all the experts advising. Do I have to have inside the government? I mean, you can still have it. I'm not saying don't have them. My contention is there should be a clarity of thought. Just because I'm annoyed with a few, I start getting somebody else. It doesn't work that way.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have picked up, I think, most of the questions from the chat box. I would now request you to give your closing remarks.
First of all, I must compliment all of you for picking up such questions as you did. They're very incisive. I've been attending webinars almost, as I said, 2 a day. And it's a pleasure interacting with you and the questions here. My suggestion to all those, I mean, I was also looking at the chat box, is that as teachers, you have huge responsibility because unlike us, you are influencing young minds, young fertile minds. The way you conduct yourself, the way you talk, the way you walk, the way you interact, at that age, child is extremely impressionistic. He carries that impression. I still remember the mannerism of my teacher, the way they taught. So you have the responsibility there to actually create this brilliance in these children, make them into human beings, make them be able to associate with the society as they should. Enormous responsibility on your shoulders. Easy for me to say, very difficult for you. But I had the pleasure of interacting with such teachers who inspired me and continue to inspire me. So as I said, since it has been done, it can be done. So please do it. And of course, reference point is none other than Swami himself. Keep going back to him. Wherever you have a question in mind, read more of it. I would find most of the answers there. You would also find the answers there. Answers available. If you deeply sit alone and think and reflect, you'll find your answers. And finally, whatever you do what you think is correct. I did that. Listen to everyone, and then did not blame anybody else for the consequences of what I. In any case, I was not too hassled about the consequences. It would be wrong of me to say that I was not conscious of the consequences, but I was not overly worried about it. Some of them came, some of them happened, some of them didn't happen, but that's how life is. That's how we got to work. I was always aware of the fact, and that gave me a lot of comfort, was that I could do precious little to people around me. If it happened, by the grace of God, fair enough. But I could do enormous things to myself. I can continue to learn. I am learning even today. I read a lot now. I write a lot now. I talk a lot now. And all this is a source of learning for me. And I'll continue to learn in days to come. Do keep in touch with me. If you read these books, I would love to have your comments. I would request the organizers to convey my email ID to everyone who's attended today. Swarup8@yahoo.com, SWARUP, number 8@yahoo.com. Please convey to everyone. I would look forward to your comments on what more could have been said, whether you agree, disagree, because it's through that conversation that I learn more. Thank you very much for inviting me here.
Sir, before I hand over to Dr. Balu for the formal vote of thanks and concluding remarks, I just was very tempted, as you were mentioning about writing a lot. I did read that you wrote one page every day all through your career, and I at least I don't write so much, and I have not seen many of my friends write quite a bit. So. Why would you do that? I'm just tempted to ask this very personal question.
It helped me write these books, because otherwise you will forget. As you grow old, you forget everything. There's nothing great in what I write. It's most of what happened during the day. So, for example, if I write on the day Babri Masjid fell down, if I had not recorded those details, then I would have forgotten it. How would I write this book? It becomes much easier for me to write a book now. So, as simple as that. And secondly, I've always believed in having some discipline in my life. This was one such discipline of writing a page every day.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Balu to give his concluding remarks and render the vote of thanks.
It's such a pleasure listening to you, sir. And you concluded your remark, right? Just now, Pravin's question saying discipline. I have rarely seen a speaker being disciplined enough to just stick to the answer and to the point. Sometimes one always worries whether the speaker is going to stop answering the question. And you are so disciplined, you're crisp, and the meticulousness with which you just answered what was required and absolutely straightforward. I think your career has been similarly as sharp as an arrow, and I like what you said. You listen to everybody, plus finally do what you think is the right thing and take the responsibility for it, take the consequences for it. Face the consequences. I think this was not just a talk on ethical dilemmas or about teachers. I was seeing a lot of messages on leadership as you were describing it and as we were talking. Having had the pleasure or the pain of being coming to LBSNA for several sessions on leadership, I've always been fascinated how bureaucrats are expected to be leaders, but are always being trained to be administrators. And I always felt the inadequacy of a nation is in trying to create more and more administrators without recognizing that we are not even teaching them to administer themselves properly. And to the point where, like you said, I couldn't change the system. Obviously, it's too small to worry about Mussoorie, but I stopped going there. But after listening to you, I think if people like you could share these thoughts with the current generation of young bureaucrats across the country, I think there's such wisdom in what you accumulated over your service. And I really feel you should possibly bring out a book on what India needs for administrators and policy making. That's something I hope that will be your next book, sir, with all your experience that we thrown into it. So it was such a pleasure. Like you said, dilemmas many times are also personally made by each one of us because we subscribe to one set of convictions, but living them is not always convenient. And then we get into this tragedy of trying to compromise. And most of the time, people fall succumbing to the conveniences of life rather than living by their convictions. But you've been a standing testimony that you can still do a lot of good and live by your convictions and live with a clean heart. So it was such a privilege, sir. We at the Vivekananda Youth Movement always believe that what you said in the beginning, that all we need to see is positivity all around us. And the more you grow, we see Guru Mantra as a satsang, and we consider your presence to be elevating this to that level today too. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for participating with us and being with us. And now that you offered your email, we'll all be sure to trouble you and exploit you and get your opinion and thoughts on some of the quandaries.
No, I love to receive messages, and I, even as Secretary Government of India, is to guarantee the response within 24 hours. I do that even now. That's another discipline that I have. Look forward to hearing from all of you. Some people are still asking the name of my book in the chat box. Would it be possible for you to convey the names to them individually, along with my email ID, so that they can write to me? Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being with all of you. Do keep in touch now that you have my email ID. Would love to hear from you. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, sir. And just to kind of conclude, and next week at the same time, we would be in a discussion with Ms. Uma Mahadevan. She has traveled extensively across Karnataka as the principal secretary of WCD, has actually seen the Anganwadi system inside out, and she will have very insightful thoughts and to share with all of us. And subsequent to that, we will have Dr. Ananta from the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Peace. And this would be the day immediately after Gandhi Jayanti, where he would talk about peace education, which has been there as a part of NCF and the NEP and SDGs as well. And then the week after that, we would have another writer who has written a book called Ordinary People, Extraordinary Teachers, Mr. S. Giridhar from Azim Premji University. So look forward to meeting all of you here every week. Thank you, everyone. It was a great evening. Thank you, sir, once again.